Welcome to Issues That Matter. And as I always say, we have a good show for you today. And one of these days I may say, you know what? We have a terrible show for you today. But this is not that show. We have a good show planned for you today. And I have two guests. One guest is Shelley. There I go again. I goofed again. Shelley Fleming Wigglesworth. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Who's a freelance author, journalist, very active in the Kennebunkport, Arundel communities. And my second guest is also a very special guest. He's a Vietnam veteran, Kevin Welch. Did I pronounce it?
Welch.
Okay, Kevin Welch. Again, I apologize. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you.
Shelley, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
What was that?
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. And I'm sorry that I messed up your names.
It's okay.
I got to get a new host. This is 2 weeks in a row I've done this. Okay, Kevin, Vietnam veteran. Being a veteran today holds a little bit of a different meaning than what it held back in the 70s, 60s and 70s. Talk about that for a little bit if you don't mind.
Well, actually, in the 60s and 70s, when the Vietnam War was going, my personal view was my father served in World War II, and it was my turn to serve. And I joined. I didn't want to get. I knew I was going to get drafted. I didn't want to wind up in the infantry, which I wound up anyway. But I joined to serve my country. I was going to be a helicopter pilot. And today, I think that it's maybe more about protecting the country than we were fighting against communism, but it was sort of an abstract thing over in Southeast Asia, and nobody even knew where Vietnam was. Whereas today, I mean, we had the 9/11 attacks, and the soldiers are more or less fighting to stop the spread of terrorism. Our country has been invaded by the terrorists, whereas in Vietnam, we were never invaded by the Vietnamese. So it was different on that aspect.
The big difference that I see is the welcoming home of the veterans who served. And in today's world, a veteran comes back, he's a hero, as he should be. Right. As he or she should be. They very much should be heroes, should be treated like heroes. Very unfortunately, back in the 70s, when our veterans came back from Vietnam, they were not treated. They were treated as a lot of things. Heroes was not one of them.
Right.
And we talked earlier about how we should never let that happen again. The veterans that come back from the Middle East, fighting the wars, they are heroes. The veterans that came back from Vietnam, they were heroes, but they were not treated as such.
Right.
And that's one of the driving forces for me to have this show. Now you have some pictures that you wanted to.
Yes, I do.
Well, let's give it a show and let's challenge me to see if I can mess this up. Let's see. The jungles of Vietnam.
That's coming out of the Ia Drang Valley. That was the first major battle of the Vietnam War was fought in LZ, X-ray LZ, Albany by the 1st Cav. And that was in 1965. That's when Joe Galloway wrote the book where we were soldiers once and young. We were there in '69. We didn't know about the battle. We found a lot of artifacts, a lot of spent brass, clothing, stuff like that. And we knew someone made some serious contact, but we didn't really know till years later what had happened.
Now the war in Vietnam, if I'm not, and I'm pretty certain about this, although I could be mistaken. The Vietnam War actually started with the French.
French Indochina, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And we
they-
found a lot of artifacts from them too. And a lot of Vietnamese words are from French derivative. Yeah.
Yep. Now, who's this handsome young gentleman in this picture?
That was me. I became RTO, radio telephone operator. We got attacked by a Bengal tiger August 11th in Play Me, Vietnam. And he got our junior RTO, who was right beside me. The tiger grabbed him and started dragging him away. And he was screaming, "Help me, help me." And the tiger didn't kill him. The tiger got 3 guys that night. He killed 1 guy. But I was a former point man, and I wound up taking his position as junior RTO.
Point man. Explain.
That was the guy that walked out in front of everyone, leading the company or platoon from point A to point B. You always zigzagged the course. You didn't go in a straight line because the enemy would know where you were heading. Growing up in Maine, I did a lot of hunting when I was a kid. My father showed me how to read a topography map real well. Plus, I was in Boy Scouts. I learned real well. So I was pretty at home in the jungles of Vietnam because it was a lot like Maine in the summertime, the vegetation and the thickness. I mean, there's different kind of vegetation over there, but it was very similar. So I felt more comfortable leading the company than having some guy from some city somewhere that didn't have a clue. So I volunteered to walk point. So I did that quite a while.
Now, one of the things that we talked about earlier was the difference in how you were deployed. Back in previous wars, people went over in units. The Vietnam War was different. How so?
Right. Everybody in the U.S. Army had 12 months. So you'd go in as a replacement. When you got to your company, there was guys that they call it DEROS, and they would DEROS. They were getting out, and you'd go in and be their replacement. So everyone in the company was on a different time frame. So some guys might be there for 10 months, some 6 months, 3 months, whatever. And the guys that had, we call it time and country, the guys with the time and country were the guys that taught us the proper procedures, proper protocol, on sending out, we sent out listening posts and observation posts, and we did SIRP teams, short-range recon patrols, and we learned from the guys before us, but when your year was up, then you went home. So you went home by yourself. You came by yourself, and you went home by yourself. Whereas today, they go as a whole unit, and that way they're debriefed. When they come back, they spend time together debriefing, talking about some of the things they went through. Whereas with us, I turned my weapon in. I was in Camp Enari in Pleiku. I turned my weapon in, and they flew us to Cam Ranh Bay, and from Cam Ranh Bay, they flew us to Yokota, Japan, and then Fort Lewis, Washington. And then I was out of the Army. I processed out, and my time was up. But I went by myself, and when I came home, I was all by myself. So there
Which is so much different.
Oh yeah, totally different.
what people picture.
There was no welcome home, no nothing. There was a lot of war protesters, so they actually flew us in the middle of the night so we wouldn't have to face them. And then a lot of us, we wore civilian clothes when we flew back because we didn't want them to know we were in the military.
One of the driving forces for me to have a show such as this is the difference, the treatment of the vets coming back from Vietnam. And I was never in the military, and so I'm not going to lay claim to having any personal experience in that regard. I can think of the days that I was anti-war, but I never, ever held it against the soldiers
Right.
to carry out the war, that carried out the war. But I know from back in those days, television, which is not quite as technically advanced as TV is today,
Right.
but there was, I vividly remember scenes of things that were done that were dastardly.
Right. The TV was a lot different then. It's more sanitized and censored now. They don't have the reporters in showing you some of the horrendous things that happened and all that. Whereas in Vietnam, it was pretty much wide open because it was I think it was the first televised war. And we actually had CBS reporters going with us and stuff at different times and be filming and stuff. And at night when we had our night logger set up, sometimes they'd be talking, we'd have, you're in a combat area, shut up, don't say anything, you're gonna give our position away, get us killed. It was, it was just completely different than today.
And I forget the name of the historian that coined this phrase. If you forget history, you're doomed to repeat
Right.
history.
Right.
And we should never, ever, ever, ever come close to repeating that part of our history.
Right.
Because that was dastardly, the way the
was.
Vietnam veterans were treated. But while I'm on that subject, thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you.
But you're not done with the show yet, so don't get too excited. Okay, what is this?
This is just moving out on a road. We come into someplace and we were just all moving out, getting ready to, then we'd head off into the jungle. You can see we carried a lot of gear. We were one of the heaviest humping outfits in Vietnam because when we were in the jungle, we'd go out for a month and a half. So you carried a lot of gear, and then we got resupplied by helicopters. But a basic load, you'd have like 600 rounds of ammo for your M16, 7 quarts of water. You'd carry a case of C rations and some LRP rations with that. Your poncho liner, hand grenades, claymore mines, trip flares, an entrenching tool. We dug in every night because we got mortared or ground attacks. We'd always have a fighting position. We'd dig in and we'd set up trip flares and claymores in front of our position for an early warning. And then in front of that, we'd have what we called LPs, listening posts. They were 4-man positions, and they were our early warning telling us that the enemy's coming. So yeah, we carried an awful lot of gear, but we had to, because if we made contact, you couldn't get ammo right off. You had to have the ammo that would last. And sometimes we'd actually carry LAWs. They were light anti-tank weapons, but they were like instant artillery. You could fire them off real fast, and then it would buy you time. And then we'd call in artillery and call in airstrikes. So yeah, we definitely carried a lot, and it was like 100+ degrees, and it would kick your butt. I'm telling you, every single day carrying that much weight and that temperature, it would really.
And judging from the picture that we saw earlier, you did not have a lot of body weight.
No, I didn't. I was skinny as well. I lost 25 pounds. We ate tin dinners, C rations, and LRP rations were dehydrated. We carried C4 plastic explosives, and we used the plastic explosives to blow an LZ. A lot of times we'd be in thick jungle and you couldn't get a helicopter.
Blow an LZ?
Yeah, a landing zone. You take the C4 and stick it on all these trees and then wrap det cord around all of them, and then we had electrical firing devices, and you'd fire it off and the trees would fall like toothpicks. They'd all go in. And then we'd get a helicopter that could come in and hover, and they'd kick out ammo and food. And I actually met a guy out in Pennsylvania who was a kicker. And the Air Force had these helicopters. They had a twin main rotor that intermeshed, and the back opened up, and he'd be up hovering above us, and he'd kick out the food and ammo. He got shot right through the chest. We were camping out up in Pennsylvania, and he saw my license plate on my truck, NAM 69. So we got talking, and come to find out, he was one of the guys that was resupplying us. He was there the exact same time I was. He showed me his bullet wound, just missed his heart, went in his chest and out his back. But yeah, we were in some pretty. I found out years later that we were outnumbered something like 8-1. We were in some pretty bad areas. Like I said, Chupa Mountains, Ia Drang Valley, LZ Oasis, right along the Cambodian border. It was the main infiltration route for the North Vietnamese Army, and we were there to interdict. We were there for search and destroy, weapons, caches, whatever we could find. That's basically what we did. Yeah.
Well, it's just based on pictures, and as I mentioned earlier, the only real sense I got, they never made a movie. Oh yes, I should say they have made movies about Vietnam, but the show that I think has influenced a lot of people is MASH.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of the same parallels can be drawn, correct?
Yeah. In MASH, they had the Bell helicopter. They show bringing guys in, and then we had the Huey. The Huey Slick was our main workhorse, and the H1 Hueys, and we usually flew 5 birds in a flight. That's what we call them, helicopters. They were birds, and one flight would carry a platoon, and we'd sit right on the edge of the helicopter with your feet hanging out on both sides, and there'd be 2 guys in the middle, and they could grab your packs. We carried our rucksacks if you felt like you were slipping. So when we made a combat assault, the first wave, the first helicopters that went in, we'd have Cobra gunships coming in on either side of us firing, and the door gunners would be firing, and they wouldn't land. You'd jump on the skid 3 or 4 feet off the ground and hit the ground and drop your pack there, but you had your ammo was separate from your pack, and we'd go out and establish a perimeter. And then the next wave would come in, and then the next wave, until we finally got a whole company in. A company would consist of 100, 120 guys. And then once we got established, then we'd head out on our mission, whatever that was. And we'd go single file through the jungle, and we'd put flank security out. But a lot of times the jungle was so thick that we'd have to hack our way with machetes. I mean, it was really thick going. And other times it was more open. So
And correct me if I'm wrong, which I could well be, there were snipers
oh yeah,
throughout.
yeah, we get sniper fire frequently, very frequently. A lot of times we'd be set up on a SERP team, short range recon, and we'd watch like almost a regiment of NVA go by us. That we'd be outnumbered by so many, it was incredible. There'd be 4 of us and be well over 100, 150 of them. So we'd let them go, and what we do is we call artillery in on them or call airstrikes in on them. But we always tried to keep things in our favor. We wouldn't want to try to make contact when we were outnumbered by that many people, because you wouldn't. The odds were against you. We tried to keep things in our favor. So you had to be pretty smart about it.
Not a bad thing to do.
No.
Not a bad thing at all to do.
No.
Do you keep in touch with people that you served with?
Absolutely, yeah. Several of them have passed away. My best friend, Bob Howe from Vernon, Vermont, we went through the whole thing together, and we were best friends for years and years. And he got diabetes from Agent Orange, and eventually he passed away. There's a reunion in Kokomo, Indiana every year that I go to, and I meet up with other guys that I served with and other Vietnam vets. It's the guy told us there was something like 30,000 Vietnam vets go to that, but they have a couple Huey helicopters there, and we go for a helicopter ride. And like my wife said, it's like a mini Woodstock. You know, they get bands playing, and we drink beer and just
Your wife,
chat it up.
isn't that the studio audience of one that we
Yes.
have out there?
Yes, that is. Yeah.
Wow. What parallels would you draw relative to serving the military today as opposed to serving the military back when?
I think that a lot of the tactics that we developed with the helicopters and setting up the LZs, the landing zones, and the fighting positions and the tactics of moving and stuff, I think a lot of the stuff that we developed in Vietnam they're using today, and they're using some of the same weapons too. You know, I guess the Marines brought back the M14. They use them for sniper rifles. They still have M60 machine guns. And 50 caliber machine guns, I can remember having a 50 cal that was made in Saco, Maine. It was right on the barrel, which I thought that was pretty cool. But I think that a lot of the techniques they're using today, they're using a lot of the same equipment. The Chinook helicopters, the C-130s, the Cobra gunships. There's so much equipment they're using today that we used way back when.
Testament to the quote, the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Exactly, exactly.
Because warfare today is, big picture, totally different. And one of the concerns that I would have, that I've had, is, you know, our warfare today is more antiseptic warfare. You know, there's
Right, drones and all that.
really not a lot of
Right.
hand-to-hand combat.
Right. Ours was hand-to-hand. We all carried bayonets. We fixed bayonets. You know, close combat, you used your bayonet. Yeah, it was. I spent most of my year in an area that was called a free kill zone. There was not supposed to be any friendlies there. They were all enemies. And it was, we had a driving force and a blocking force. And I liken it to hunting deer, only these deer were shooting back. But we'd try to drive the enemy, and we'd have a blocking force waiting for them. And higher up, what they wanted body count weapons, and you know, rice caches, anything that, you know, any supplies that we could find. But that was basically the mission. You know, it was, but the big picture, we didn't really have any big picture. We'd go take a hill, spend 2 or 3 days taking something over, and then within a couple days we'd abandon it and go somewhere else. And then we'd come back to the same place a few months later and do it all over again. In the meantime, guys were getting killed doing that. Whereas in World War II, they had front lines. They had established goals to what they were doing. We really never had that. So.
Now this picture here,
That's me. That's my buddy Howie from Vermont, who passed away, and that's Kemper. He was our machine gunner, and we were all, I don't know if you know, we're wearing neckerchiefs. We worked with the CIDG. They were the Mountain Yard tribesmen, and the Special Forces armed them with M1 carbines, and we showed them how to go on jungle patrols and stuff. And we actually built a fire base with these guys. We built bunkers. We dug in. And they wore red neckerchiefs. We wore red, white, and blue. But they got, as you can see, they got pretty dirty fast because the red dirt
yeah, I wonder why.
digging in. So anyway, I got to work with the Mountain Yard. They're like the indigenous people of Vietnam. And I actually made some recordings. We had cassette tape players, so of course they never saw anything like that.
How did, and this is confusing to me, I'm sure it's confusing to other people, but how did the people of Vietnam treat you while you were over there?
You know, I never had a lot of contact with the Vietnamese people because I was always at a fire base or out in the jungle or something, so I had very little contact with the Vietnamese. The ones that I did have brief contact seemed to be pretty nice. When I first got in country, I got sent. They sent 8 of us guys from the 4th Infantry to the 116th Combat Engineers, the Idaho National Guard, and we were building a new base camp in this place called Bazar, B-Z-A-R, which was south of Delot, and there was a little town there, this Bazar, and there was a bar there, and we get to go down there on a weekend, maybe drink a few beers with some Arvins and see some of the locals. But that was about the extent of my contact with the Vietnamese people. I really didn't have much contact at all.
Shelley, your free ride is over.
Yeah.
Now, your father served in Vietnam, correct?
Yes, he was a Navy Seabee in Da Nang, and he did 2 tours of duty in 65 and 67.
What impact did his service have on your family?
He never talked about it, never wanted to talk about it at all, and I think he just tried to push it all away. But growing up, it was difficult. We could never wake him up if he was taking a nap, if he had a phone call, because he would get up and think he was in Vietnam. He had a lot of night terrors, and he still suffers from that. He gets triggers, and sometimes he'll still wake up and think he's in Vietnam, and all of these years later. He didn't participate a lot. I think it took all that he had just to kind of live and go to work every day. I think it exhausted him to put on a face because he was just living in a society where nobody understood and what he went through, and he never had the opportunity to debrief or get any sort of counseling. It wasn't until years later when he started to have some medical issues that he learned more about PTSD and said, I think I have this, But it was just very difficult. I knew he loved us, but it was hard for him to show that because I think a lot of things that he did, he was trying to prepare me and my 3 brothers for a cruel world. And so he brought us up in that way. And but he was looking out for our best interest, but it was very difficult, not a lot of interaction as a father. I always say my father was there the best that he could be. But, and I know he loved us, and that's really what's important. But he couldn't show it or even be there. He wouldn't go to our school things or anything like that. It was difficult for him to be around, and it still is today. People in public places. And
Yep. Again, the Vietnam War was a terrible piece of our history in the sense that it was a horrific war that was handled incorrectly, to say the least, and it's left a big scar. Do you feel any resentment or anything?
I was able to go to Vietnam about 8 years ago with a group of veterans. It's called TOP, Tours of Peace, and they take veterans or close family members back to Vietnam. So I got to see where my dad served, and I went with 10 strangers, most of them Vietnam veterans who had combat veterans, and we visited the places where they served, and I got to see where my dad served, and we did some humanitarian work. It was a twofold thing. We had a counselor there with us and a tour guide and everything, but
Who sponsored that?
it's called Tours of Peace, TOP, Vietnam Veterans. It's founded by a Marine, a Vietnam vet Marine, and it's based in Tucson, Arizona. And they take a group back every year. It's only open to close family members or Vietnam vets themselves. My father had no interest in going back at all, and I was very nervous in even telling him that I was planning to do this. Because he still has a lot of trust in his mind. Vietnam is the Vietnam from the 60s and a very dangerous place. He did support me. He did support me though, and said, if you feel like you need to do it, go ahead, but I will never go back there. And one thing I found was I was the only daughter on that trip or the only child of Vietnam veterans. And most of the men that I was with, they were estranged sort of from their own children, just as I was from my father. There was some distance, but they could play the father role to me, and I could kind of help them with the child, what their kids, try to help them understand what their kids went through. And so it was interesting. They became very much like father figures to me, and I'm still in contact with them to this day. I mean, when you spend just 2 weeks in Vietnam with people you've never met before, and you're going back to places where they lost people and they saw some bad things happen, and it's very emotionally toiling. It was the longest 2 weeks of my life, and I can't imagine serving there in combat. Just being in such a foreign country, and a lot hasn't changed, really. There are people still getting water out of wells and cooking over fires and using water buffalo. You'll see a water buffalo, somebody kind of driving one down the street, or ox, or whatever they are, alongside people on motorcycles,
What were they?
Water
They were
buffalo.
both, yeah. Well, some of them look different. Were they all water buffalo?
Yeah, that's all I ever saw.
So that was a really good experience for me, and I think that growing up the way I did, and knowing that my father loved us and was doing his best just to live every day, it fueled something in me. And when I went to college, whenever I could tie anything into any sort of assignment into the Vietnam War, I did that. I did a lot of research, and then when I started writing, I've done a lot of series and worked with a lot of veterans, and I'm actually doing a series on Vietnam veterans now. And it's just a whole broad spectrum, but it's enriched my life, and I can't say enough about people that served, and Vietnam veterans in particular. I have a special place in my heart for them, and I always will. And I feel like I'm a medium, maybe, to get their story out.
How did you and Kevin meet?
We met through his lovely wife, my friend. And I knew right away, because he had his license plate, that he was a Vietnam veteran. And we actually have talked a lot, because my dad is a veteran too. And Kevin's actually filled in a lot of gaps for me too. We have a common bond there. And I'll be writing about Kevin too in my upcoming series and his experience. And
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you do now.
yes.
What your field of work is.
Well, I'm a freelance journalist, and I write for about 10 publications. A lot of them are fishing magazines. I do a lot of at-sea stories and work with commercial fishermen. But I also write for local newspapers and local magazines as well. And I have my own column, the Kennebunk Town column, and a new magazine that I'm writing for, Neighbors of the Kennebunks. I get to choose the cover stories every month. So I have the ability to get messages out there that I feel are very important. And it's, as a freelance journalist, that's very important to me, to be able to write about what I believe in. I work for myself, so if something doesn't feel right, I never ever write about anything that doesn't feel right or it isn't something that I believe in.
Well, I know when we were in conversation about you appearing on the show, you were very cautious that this is something that would be good to do.
Yeah.
You did not go in blind.
Yeah, I really wanted to make sure, especially since, I kind of brought Kevin into it, and I told him, I don't know what to expect here. I like to always check things out first. I don't want anybody to get involved in anything that they feel blindsided by. So.
Well, I don't think I've violated
No,
anything yet.
you've been well.
I have no expectation of doing it at all.
This is perfect. Thank goodness.
Wow. What are you working on now? What issues are you trying to be on top of these days?
Well, as I said before, the broad spectrum Vietnam veterans issues, Vietnam vets and the healthcare system and the VA, and there's a lot of stuff going along with that. And veterans serve their country, and they deserve to be taken care of when they come home.
My link with Vietnam, the Vietnam War, I do a lot of advocacy work with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and one of the things that we advocate for every year is funding for the Congressionally Directed Military Research Program, CDMRP, which you might or might not have heard of before. Well, they found out that through the veterans of the Vietnam War, they seem to have a much higher incidence of multiple sclerosis
And
than
cancer,
than the general population.
and specific cancers, and a lot of
Yep.
things.
And
yeah.
that prompted them to come up with this new program, which is viewed as a high value program, very expensive. A lot of funding goes into it, and the research that is done is extremely expensive to carry it out, more so than what would be considered the norm. But if something works out, the payback is extraordinary. And it's a very important part of the research that is being done for multiple sclerosis, as well as for a multitude of other diseases. So that's my only link, you might say, with the CDMRP and the military. But I am a big believer in the thought, if you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's a piece of our history that I hope to never be alive to see, and I hope my following generations are never alive to see. So, Kevin, thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
It was a heroic thing,
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I just
and I suspect there are pieces of your memory when you think about those years. There are pieces of those years that you say, this was good.
oh yeah, those
Talk about a little bit about those good pieces
in Vietnam.
in Vietnam.
I wound up getting a job at water point guard at Campanari in Pleiku. That was the drinking water, and they had a swimming pool there in Campanari, so I got to go with my buddies to the pool. That was fun. We go to the EM club and drink a few beers, or NCO club.
You said you got a job.
Well, I went from infantry line company. There was always openings in the rear for tower guards, perimeter guards, and there was an opening for a water point guard, which was like an old volcano that was full of water, and they had the piping that went into Campanari, which was 4th Division headquarters in Pleiku. So someone had to guard that drinking water. They had 3 bunkers set up there. We had a 50 caliber machine gun, and we'd pull guard duty. You pull an hour and a half guard, 3 hours sleep, an hour and a half guard, 3 hours sleep. And then in the daytime, we'd leave 1 or 2 guys out on the water point, and the rest of us would get to go into the rear.
Is this 50 caliber?
That's a 50 caliber right there, yeah. That's with the 116th Combat Engineers. I actually replaced the guy who was a machine gunner. He was killed. He was beside a guy that they stepped on a mine. It was kind of a fluke thing, because the engineers were clearing this Bouncing Betty minefield and to put culverts in on this road, and they had a crane with a drag line, and what they do is they'd blow the mines in place, and then they were digging them out and piling up the dirt. And at the end of the day, this guy walked up on the pile of dirt. I mean, we're all 19-year-old kids, and he stepped on a mine that was missed and went off, and the guy beside him, who was the former head machine gunner, he was killed. So I was an infantry soldier, and so they asked me if I'd be the lead gunner. We'd convoy, haul gear from Dalat back to the fire base that we were building in Bazaar, and I was the lead gunner on the convoy, so that's how I wound up getting that job. So I was with the 116th Combat Engineers. Were from Idaho, and most of the guys in the company, they were Mormons, so it was a different thing for me, you know, but it was cool. They were good guys, but it was a whole different learning thing for me.
What was the big difference?
Well, for one thing, they didn't smoke, drink, swear. They were pretty clean living people. You know, being from.
Are you saying that you have another side of you that we're not seeing?
Yeah. So the few of us would get together and we'd have a few cocktails and and whatnot, and it was just it was just a whole different experience, something I never experienced before, and most of the guys, not most of the guys, a lot of the guys in the company were also like church elders and stuff, and the platoon leader would be the church elder, and they were cousins, and a lot of them were related. So if someone got wounded or got killed, it was pretty bad. It was like in an infantry line company, you really didn't know guys outside your platoon. You really didn't know them. Because your platoon, you were always together with those guys in your squad. So if someone got killed in the 1st or 2nd platoon, you wouldn't know them. Whereas the engineers, everybody knew everybody. It was just a different
Like a fraternity.
circumstance. Yeah, it was. You know, and they were all from like Boise, Idaho, and whatnot, and you know they lived back in Idaho and worked together back in Idaho together, and they all volunteered, and you know they had that engineer outfit, and they went to Vietnam, and they did their thing. They had, you know, heavy equipment and all that, and I was pretty lucky that they picked 8 of us from 4th Infantry to go pull security while these guys were building this base camp, and I was pretty lucky that I got chosen to go there. I don't know how my name got chosen, but from being in an infantry line company, it was like night and day. Engineers had cots and mosquito netting. Infantry guys, we slept on the ground. There was no cots, there was no net, no mosquito, anything. We had the highest malaria rate of any company in Vietnam. And there's 2 kinds of malaria. So we take these orange pills every Monday. We called them the Monday pill. And then every day we take these little white pills. And there was so many guys getting malaria that higher up said, there's no way these guys can be taking their pills and be getting malaria like they are. So we used to have to take our pill in front of the platoon leader, the lieutenant, and he had a roster, and he'd witness you swallowing the pill, and he'd check your name off on the roster saying, yeah, this guy took his pill. But there was a lot of disease over there. I got a fever of unknown origin, and 6 or 7 of us come down with it all at the same time. And I got sent to the 71st Evac Hospital in Pleiku, and it felt like someone was hitting me on the head with a hammer. That was the worst headache I ever had, and fever. And some of the guys, they had to ice them down. They put you on a stretcher and pack you in ice. And I mean, there was a lot of disease, a lot of stuff to get you over there. You know, other than the enemy trying to kill you, there was a lot of other things trying to kill you too. So.
Any lingering effects,
Oh yeah.
health-wise?
I have, of course, chronic severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I went into a punji pit. I got a punji stick in the corner of my eye. Luckily, it deflected out. If it went in, I wouldn't be here. So I have trouble with my eyes, chronic conjunctivitis and stuff. I still have the fever of unknown origin. I still have the night sweats. I still have the nightmares and stuff, intrusive thoughts. But I just go with it. That's all you can do. That's why the suicide rate is so high, is because it just works on you and works on you. And a lot of the guys, they can't take it anymore. They just had enough, and that's it, you know. But my outlook is I'm gonna share my story, so hopefully it won't, like you said, history won't repeat itself. And just to let the public know, you know, this is what we go through, you know. And people look at you and they'll say, "Oh, I don't see anything wrong with you." Well, PTSD, that's an inner thing, you know. It's a completely different thing.
Yep.
So I just do my best to get the word out. So that's.
Well, that's excellent. That's good. That's better than good. It's great.
Yeah.
Because as I said a few times already, I'm not going to repeat it again because it should not be too repetitive. But you know, we got to be constantly reminded.
Right.
It's so important that we need to be constantly reminded.
It is.
Now, if we had a fairly good discussion today, I think. What's your takeaway?
I don't know. I just I'm happy that I'm sharing my story, so there'll be a better understanding of what veterans go through, and I just want to see that veterans get proper health care that we earned and we deserved.
What are you, if I can interrupt for 1 second, what are your thoughts about, not so much today as it was a few months ago, a few months back, the reports about the veterans, the VA?
The VA is different in different parts of the country. I've gone to Alaska, for instance, and gotten sick, and I went to Fort Wainwright, which is an Army base, and they treat you like gold. It's way better treatment. And you go to some of these other VA facilities, and you don't get treated too well at all. They have this new Veterans Choice program, which is going to allow us to see a civilian, go to like Maine Met or whatever, instead of having to drive, like from where I live, it's over 100 miles one way. Instead of having to drive a couple hundred miles to get a doctor's visit, we're going to be able to go to like Maine Met or whatever. And I think
It boggles my imagination why that was ever the case.
Togus is the oldest VA hospital. Togus was built for Civil War veterans.
From what I understand, Togus is one of the better facilities in the VA system.
It is. I think one of the reasons is we don't have such a big population here in Maine. I think you might get a little better treatment up there. And I've gone through all kinds of programs up there. And all in all, I think Togus is not too bad. If it wasn't for the driving distance, that's the whole, my whole thing is that in the wintertime is the worst. In the summertime, it's not so bad. But in the wintertime, when the roads are all icy and slippery, and it's just, it's like a 2-hour drive.
White knuckle ride.
Yeah, it's just, and when you're younger, it's not so bad, but as you're getting older, it's, I don't really need all that stress, and I'm looking forward that this Veterans Choice program is going to work. Right now, there's a few problems. Just, you have to call and let them know ahead of time, and in the office you call us down in Virginia, and nothing against my southern brothers I served with, but I have a hard time understanding what they're saying on the phone. Likewise, they have a hard time understanding what I'm saying. So that's one of the things. I know if I do have problems, I found out over the years, I call my senator. I called Olympia Snowe, Linda Lyon, and they would really help me out. Now I call Susan Collins, and Alex is one of the people that work with her, and they've helped me out a lot. So just to reduce the stress of when you call a VA, it's like micromanage. They want to know what's your name, what's your social security number. Then they'll pass you on to the next stage. What's your name, what's your social security number. This goes on and on and on. And the new system, I think, is going to eliminate a lot of that. You can deal directly with them, and that's what I'm hoping.
Shelley, your takeaway.
Don't blame the veterans for that war. And if you were not there, you don't know the horrific things they experienced as young men and women. Don't judge them. Don't blame them. It's time to listen to them. They know. They have a lot of valuable information. We need to listen to them, take care of their medical needs, and it's never too late to thank them, ever.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, thank you both. And thank you for being a marvelous studio audience. You did not interrupt, not even once.
Neither did I.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you again for your service.
Thank you.
And with that, I guess I'll be calling a close to this episode. I think it's a valuable episode. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you the next time. Have a great day. God bless. Bye-bye.